Capitol Report is a production of Senate Media Services.
This week, Human Services Chair John Hoffman talks about the pros and cons of his funding package, and Higher Education Chair Omar Fateh makes the case for free college. Plus, Governor Walz signs into law bills to protect gender expansive and trans people. Stay tuned for this and more on this week's Capitol Report. Welcome to this week's program. I'm Shannon Loehrke. Minnesota is now a Midwestern sanctuary for abortion services and gender-affirming care. Governor Tim Walz signed into law 3 bills debated and passed by the Senate last week. On a bipartisan vote of 36 to 27, the Senate passed a bill to ban the practice of conversion therapy for minors and vulnerable adults.
Conversion therapy includes an array of practices that seek to persuade or induce an individual into believing their sexual orientation or gender identity can be changed. This is shown to be impossible. The true effect is to communicate to that person that they are disordered. Who they are is wrong. It is sinful. Mr. President, this has only the effect of causing damage in the form of depression, decreased self-esteem, substance abuse, self-harm, and in the worst case, suicide.
My concern is that families are going to lose a neutral option for therapy under this law. I think there has to be a neutral way for families to seek therapy in love for their child who has gender identity questions about themselves that doesn't result in automatically going down the road of what this bill calls gender-affirming care.
On a party line vote, the Senate approved a bill that provides protections for out-of-state patients and healthcare providers for abortion care in Minnesota.
Legislators in South Carolina, Arkansas, Texas, and Kentucky have introduced bills that explicitly reference homicide charges for abortion. Homicide is punishable by the death penalty in all of those states. If these bills become law, a person who has an abortion could be subject to the death penalty and be executed. These laws do not just reflect different ideologies, members. They radically interfere with the standard of care and the practice of medicine. And without our action, they will reach within our borders, following patients and preventing them from receiving life-saving medical care or punishing them for receiving such care and penalizing the Minnesota professionals that continue to legally provide it.
The choice to extend the laws of Minnesota beyond our borders is unconstitutional and will make Minnesota taxpayers liable for legal challenges and expensive payouts.
And also on a party line vote, members codified Governor Walz's executive order that makes Minnesota a refuge for people seeking gender-affirming care.
Gender-affirming care is developmentally appropriate health care that helps transgender people be seen, safe, and comfortable in who they are. It's access to life-saving care that improves mental health and overall well-being in transgender youth and adults, as evidenced in decades of peer-reviewed scientific research studies. Senate File 63 is a bill that would protect any patient who comes to Minnesota to access health care, their parents who come with their children to Minnesota to access health care, and providers here in Minnesota who provide health care to protect them from being prosecuted, extradited to other states, charged with felonies, and jailed.
This is bringing potential for the state to intervene in homes, intervene in families, violate parental rights, and cause circumstances that will end up doing harm.
The governor and legislative leaders have devoted an additional $1.3 billion of the surplus to the area that serves the elderly and people with disabilities. The Senate version of the bill passed with overwhelming bipartisan support on a vote of 63 to 4. Senator John Hoffman is the chair of the Senate Human Services Committee, and he joins me to talk about the funding package. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Senate Majority Leader Carrie Dietzig has said this bill represents the largest investment in caregivers and elder care in Minnesota history. What is the bill getting right on behalf of Minnesota's older folks as a place to start?
You know, I'm glad you bring that up because you're correct. It is the largest investment probably in the history of human services. Yet, when you look at the needs with human services, we have, for the first time in history, 1.3 million people 65 and older, right? That keeps growing. We've known for years that the silver tsunami was coming. Well, the silver tsunami is here. And yet at the same time, we have a problem in Minnesota. We have 53,000 job openings in the caregivers buckets, right? And caregivers I'm putting all into one place. PCAs, CNAs, assisted folks that work in assisted living, home health aides, right? Even to the nursing homes. And just caregivers, 53,000 job openings. It's pretty impactful when you look at 1.3 million people that are 65 and older, and what are those needs? And yet at the same time, I don't think it's enough money, and I know it's not enough money. If you wanted to fix the system, right, we want to get people to $20 an hour, because when you look at what it's not addressing, you know, if you're working in elderly waivered services, your reimbursement rates are around $13.91 an hour, right? I can go work at McDonald's for $21 an hour if I lived in Burnsville. I still have the picture, it's sitting on my desk, and I'm reminded that every day. And you say, what am I going to do to compete against folks like that, especially given the fact that these are caregiver positions? To get people to $20 an hour outside of the PCA realm, it's a $4 billion investment by the state of Minnesota, right? To really totally fix the system, to stabilize it, and I mean the system, all those different buckets that we're going to talk about, you need about $5.6 billion to do that, right? So I'm grateful we got 1.3. Let me add one more thing to that, Shannon. 1.125 billion of the surplus was money that was underspent by the Department of Human Services. Underspending means it was already budgeted to go for a service, but for whatever reason that service was not provided. I'm going to give you an anecdotal example. You had children that live with autism that need a fee-for-service, which meaning it needs to be one-on-one, right? But because I wasn't able to do the one-on-one, the budget money was there. I didn't bill for that, so that money, instead of staying in the Department of Human Services where it's desperately needed, it goes into the general fund, which in this case is the surplus. Now, add to that the Federal Medical Assistance Program money payments that came, FMAP, and that brings that bucket over there to $1.825 billion. I might be off by, you know, 200 million or so, but in my math, the real issue is I'm grateful for 1.3, but really 1.825 billion of the surplus is sitting that money should have been spent in human services.
So from where you sit, you wish that your budget target had been significantly more than where it is.
Yeah, I think the needs of Minnesota are significantly there, because if we don't invest now, which we are, we're not stabilizing the system. And to stabilize the system, there's those components that need to be, and those we did address in our bill. We increased elderly waiver services, alternative care, CADI services, the disability weight waiver system service. We tried to increase those funding. Didn't get them to the $20 an hour where they need to be, right? But we increased those funding. Plus we gave some other incentives, and I know you have some questions on that as well.
Yeah, so we'll go into some of the highlights of the bill. One of the biggest problems across the spectrum, and you've already noted this, there's a workforce shortage. The bill does provide $21 million in grants specifically for new Americans to work in and diversify the caregiving field. So who are the new Americans? How will these grants work? And do these people want this kind of work?
Absolutely. You know, and what you see is in that avenue, if we can create a pathway, a lot of folks that go into the caregiving field are also going to school to become RNs, or they're going to school, they want to be doctors, or they're going to school because they want to better their educational experience, and it gives them an opportunity to do that. I'll give you one example out in Cokato, Minnesota. Cokato Manor, I believe is what it's called. You know, I'm out there looking at the nursing home, and they used to have an assisted living, memory care, and a home health position within that environment. They shut all those wings down because of the fact they didn't have enough caregivers. So they worked with DEED in getting people, and I believe they're East African or it's East African folks that from the Horn, so it's either Kenyan or Somalia, somewhere in that area, that are here in Minnesota, and they're working in that caregiving facility, plus they're also going to school, right? And so it's like, Minnesota desperately needs people to come here, and we have folks that want to come to Minnesota. That becomes a federal issue. Open up the doorway. Come on in, you know. We got work for you to do.
The bill also supports both professional and unpaid caregivers. How will the $776 million that's been earmarked for wages, bonuses, and benefits help personal care assistance?
You know, I said this, we wouldn't be having this spotlight on if it wasn't for the fact that SEIU did what they did and organized the PCA world, right? But unfortunately, that only covers about 25% of the need that's within that world, right? And so within that $776 million, so that is a large bucket of money. A portion of that covers that PCA that SEIU helped set up, which then raises the elevation of its standard of care money, which is a good thing. But what's also missing in what we tried to address is, you know, if you're a family provider, you're a family member, you quit your job doing something, you're taking care of somebody, elderly parent that might be dementia, but they're at home or whatever, and name the label it is, but they're at home, and I want to keep mom and grandma and folks at home, but yet I'm not doing the work I'm doing. I'm saving the state and I'm saving the system money by not having my parent in a nursing home or in a facility that's going to cost a lot of money. And speaking of facilities that cost a lot of money, because we're not able to fix the system on assisted living, at-home services and nursing homes, our hospitals now, there's 2,000 people that have hospital beds, Shannon, and that's costing you as a taxpayer $2,500 per person per day. You're looking at $36 million just in that little scenario I just snapped you. Okay. Go to an emergency room. You have emergency rooms. People are actually in the hallway getting their triage, getting their work done in emergency rooms because of the fact they don't have beds in hospitals. Hospitals are now saying, we're not being able to bill for these services. Then they go into well, this is not stuff that I'm able to collect on, so I charge it off. So the system is in balance, Shannon, and I think addressing some of those things, getting those home health aides in there, giving some money and support to the caregivers that are there would absolutely start to address some of that load that's in our hospitals.
What I hear you saying, though, is that this is a Band-Aid and this is not a solution.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, you hear the Band-Aid, and to me, it is a Band-Aid. It might be a larger Band-Aid because it is, again, Senator Dietzig is absolutely spot on, and I'm grateful for her leadership because we would not be in the position we're in if it wasn't for her helping really address that issue at the point. And she knows it well. She really does know it well, and I appreciate her for that.
There's one other thing I want to talk about because I just think it's really interesting. There's funding in the bill for assistive technology consultants to improve the quality of life for people with disabilities. I imagine that this could be life-changing. Could you just provide a couple examples of what this means for people with disabilities?
Absolutely. So one apartment I was in, you know, and it was set up by an individual that, you know, lived in another state, wanted to care for his mother who was having some dementia and some other physical limitations that were occurring in her average life. And they were able to put triggers like in certain spots within the apartment that would trigger, well, where's grandma? Well, grandma's now in the kitchen. And if grandma were to fall, there's this light array system in there that's not very expensive that as soon as, you know, it shows that something's in the way, a light goes on, it triggers. It also had automatic assistive technology to remind you a light would go off and, oh, it's now time to take the pills, right? So things like that absolutely work well. And there's a lot of people out there that were doing it. It's general use now. Let's expand on that.
Senator John Hoffman, we have just scratched the surface, but I want to thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for letting me scratch the surface. Take care.
On a 39-28 vote, the Senate approved $1.3 billion for programs supporting housing construction and rental assistance.
There are a lot of good programs in here. You know, in a different time, it might be the right approach. But right now, with the housing unit shortage, I do think we missed our opportunity to actually create new units. And we fund programs before we have units to use those programs.
For communities of color, you know, homeownership is something that we have been denied. We've been denied that opportunity to build generational wealth. And this bill is including $100 million in down payment assistance for those who are going to become the first in their generation to own a home.
I will be supporting this omnibus housing bill because it does make a significant investment in housing, which will create new home ownership opportunities. It's going to expand our workforce housing. It's going to help our manufactured home park residents buy the parks in which they live.
When my counterpart in the other body, Chair Howard, and I talked about the vision we wanted, our goal with this bill and with next session's work and the session after that is to end child homelessness in Minnesota. And this bill takes a giant step towards doing just that, with focusing the rental assistance and the ongoing money on families, on folks with children under 18. We really boosted up those programs, both in the short term and long term. And I am very excited that we are taking the largest step ever to ending child homelessness in Minnesota.
The Senate and the House have passed differing funding bills for higher education that will invest more than $4 billion over the next biennium. The Senate package offers free college tuition to low and middle income students and provides significantly more than the House in emergency assistance. Senator Omar Fateh, chair of the Higher Education Committee, now joins me. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So the DFL press release about this bill talks about a fundamentally new vision that invests in students, thereby increasing accessibility. Before we break this vision down into some of the specifics, what was the impetus for you to focus on the students rather themselves, the students themselves rather than the institutions?
Yeah, well, thank you so much. So the first few hearings we had this session in the Senate Higher Education Committee, we heard from college presidents and administrators, we heard from faculty and staff, and we also had a student day. We heard from the students to hear about the challenges they're facing as well as what they expect from us and how can we address their needs. All of them stated that we should put our students front and center and make sure that we're prioritizing their needs. As a state right now, we have a 70% attainment goal statewide, and what we're seeing is that for our white students, we're at about a 68%, we're almost there. But for our black students, it's about 38%, and for our Latino and our indigenous students, we're in the 20s. So there's a real equity issue there that we're trying to address with this tuition-free piece, as well as the student support pieces within this bill.
So to break that down just a little bit, the House is offering a 2-year tuition freeze at Minnesota State universities. The Senate is offering free college tuition for people with an adjusted gross income of $80,000 or less. It's estimated that as many as 40,000 people will benefit. So why take the free tuition approach?
Yeah, that's a good question. So from what we're hearing from our students and even parents is that cost is a big issue and accessibility is a big issue. And we want to make a promise to Minnesotans, especially our working class families, that if you want to work hard, if you want to pursue a 2 or 4 year degree, and you want to enter our workforce, that we're going to guarantee you a spot in our public institutions, whether you want to pursue a 2-year degree, as I said, or a 4-year degree. Whereas a tuition freeze policy, I don't believe addresses the issue of enrollment or attainments. What we know is that college is expensive right now, and with a tuition freeze, we'd only be capping the price at what it was the previous year. It doesn't do anything in terms of accessibility. So our goal is to make sure that we're opening the doors for more students, and we're addressing the accessibility piece for the declining enrollment issue for our colleges, but also putting our students, like I said, front and center.
The Senate position nearly doubles the amount of money that is allocated for emergency assistance for post-secondary students program. It's $7.5 million each year for the next 2 years. What is the intent and how does this emergency assistance help students?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this piece of this policy proposal within our bill and the expansion of it. What we've learned is that this is one of the greatest areas of need within our institutions. Minnesota is one of the first states actually to implement this program. And during COVID, we've seen the federal government step up and provide funds to support our students with these emergency grants. But what we're seeing right now is with the funds waning and the federal dollars not being there anymore, we needed to step up as a state. Because what we learned from our students is that they're one incident away, such as a medical incident, for example, from dropping out of school. and we want to make sure that we're doing everything in our power to support our students.
And so what this means then, emergency grants, a student, say, has a big medical bill, all of a sudden, they can apply to their institution for a grant that will cover the cost of that emergency, or a car repair, or they can't make rent, or something like that, something that could lead them to leave school. Instead, they can get a grant that will help them bridge that gap.
Yes, and it disproportionately affects our low-income students as well. So we want to make sure that our working-class families, our working-class students, that we want to promise them that not only we're going to make our schools accessible to you, but while you're in school, we're going to support you any way we can to make sure that you're able to solely focus on being a student.
There's also significantly more money for the Hunger-Free Campus Grant Program. It's $1.5 million the first year, $1 million the following year. First, how does this grant program work? Is it available to both public and private collegiate institutions? And secondly, is hunger on college campuses really this dire that this kind of funding is needed?
Yeah, and this is another program that I was really excited to support. This is actually led by Senator Eric Putnam, who's a vice chair from St. Cloud of the Higher Education Committee. And we've learned that hunger on campus is a real situation, is a real issue that needs to be addressed. And within this program, there's a competitive grant award that are provided to these institutions. They have to meet a set list of criteria, for example, providing resources for students to apply for SNAP, setting up a food shelf, and then they apply for these awards. Now, currently the way the system is set up, it only applies for our public institutions and only, I believe, a handful of them. But we want to open it up for all of our public colleges, as well as our tribal colleges and our private institutions, because what we learned is that each month 40% of our students are reporting that they are food insecure. And we know that when a student goes hungry, when they have to skip a meal, that they're not able to fully participate in the classroom or on campus. And we wanted to support them and to make sure that no student goes hungry. Being one of the wealthiest states and the wealthiest nation on earth, I think it's immoral for us to continue down that path.
The Senate is also allocating $20 million to the University of Minnesota Medical School that must be used for rural medicine at CentraCare Health System campus in St. Cloud. What is the goal of this $20 million?
Yeah, so this is a partnership between the U of M and CentraCare. And what we learned is that rural healthcare is an issue that needs to be addressed. And the goal of this program is to make sure that we're developing a highly trained, highly qualified workforce to address our rural healthcare system needs. What we learned is that our rural residents are more likely to struggle with longer wait times to access care. They have to travel longer distances. They're more likely to develop illnesses and die from things like heart disease and cancer, for example. And we needed to address those issues. So I was proud to support Senator Putnam in this and address our rural healthcare needs.
Both the House and the Senate had the same target amount, and each body has chosen differently how to allocate those funds. The House provides additional funding to promote some health care careers, for example, nursing, paramedics, and addiction treatment. The Senate does not. So why did you choose not to use some of the one-time funding to provide incentives to areas where there's workforce shortages?
Well, what we've been doing in the past has not been working. And instead of nibbling around the edges, we wanted to address all areas because we have a workforce shortage problem in different fields. So rather than nibbling around the edges, as I said, we wanted to make sure that we do two things. Number one, we have a workforce development grant where we can have a partnership between these different fields and our institutions and our systems to make sure that our students are trained, but also having the tuition-free piece to make sure that our schools are accessible for all of our students so that they can pursue these different fields that are needed. We have a real workforce situation that I think the governor has rightfully prioritized, and opening up our institutions and making it free for our working class residents, I think will do just that. It'll address those issues.
Now, when this bill passed off the Senate floor, it did get 2 Republican votes. However, many Republicans have been critical because the bill does not address the fact that enrollment in public higher education institutions has been declining. So how do you respond to that?
Well, I think that this bill right now was built and designed in a way that we centered our students first, and we also tackled the issue of declining enrollment statewide. What we've seen is that there's an average of about 20–25% enrollment decline system-wide. and it's been disproportionately affecting also our rural campuses. So what we're trying to do right now is make a promise to our working class Minnesotans and every Minnesotan that our schools will be accessible for you, and that number two, we're going to continue. My goal is, with a larger budget, to expand that, to make sure that our colleges and institutions are best supported, so that we're going to continue to make sure that we don't continue on this path, because what I've heard as chair from our college presidents is if we don't do something quick, that they're going to risk closing down and shutting down campuses. And I think that'll be a very negative impact. They'll have a negative impact statewide.
Senator Omar Fateh, I want to thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
A comprehensive E-12 education funding package passed the Senate on a vote of 35 to 32.
This is an education finance bill that falls short of what we should be giving our local communities. This will not move the dial on closing the achievement gap. This will not move the dial on making sure that our classroom teachers have the resources that they need.
Somehow, Democrats in power are managing to put record funding into the education spending formula while also managing to mandate our schools into bankruptcy. I know this because I sent the bills in question to my local school districts, and here's what I heard back. The Democrats' plan for one of them will, at best, their words, force them to dip into their rainy day funds. The other districts I heard back from are looking at a much bleaker picture, saying that their plans will force them into the red by millions of dollars.
A formula increase of this size is going to make a huge difference. We have money in here for mental health support, money for school counselors, special education cross-subsidy increase that we haven't seen in maybe ever. ELL subsidy, the READ Act, money for Math Corps, after-school learning, early learning resources, and programs to recruit and train more teachers. These are genuinely things that help, genuinely things that will make a difference. I've also talked to my school boards, and yes, they have some concerns, but that's probably because for the last 6 years they haven't been properly funded and they have a hard time trusting anybody in this room.
We try to put in as much flexibility for our districts as possible. I know that they are never going to be happy. We are never going to have a fully funded educational system unless we even double what we have here. But we did the very best with what we had.
Join us again next week as we delve into more topics affecting Minnesotans. I'm Shannon Loehrke, and on behalf of all of us at Senate Media Services, thanks for watching.